Now, through the rest of Saturday into the evening and overnight, it's more of the same. It stays dry across the board. Lengthy clear skies, one or two mist and fog patches. But through the night, we'll start to see some lower clouds spreading in across eastern Scotland into eastern and central parts of England as well as that cloud moves westwards through the night. Here it won't be quite so cool, but further towards the west, another chilly night to come. Temperatures widely falling into single figures. Colder than that in some rural spots. So we get off to a bit of an east-west start to the day on Sunday morning. Quite cloudy across some central and eastern parts. Sunnier from the word go across the west. But through the day, much of that cloud will lift and break. So once again, by the time we get through to the late morning, early afternoon, another fine picture across the board. Lots of sunshine to come. Just a bit more cloud across the very far north with the odd spot of rain across Orkney and Shetland and more cloud down that North Sea coast. But again, in that sunshine, another warm day to come, 21 to 23 degrees. And it stays fine, dry and settled for most areas into the early part of next week. High pressure still dominating, so lots more sunshine to come. And in that sunshine, once again, it will be pleasantly warm with highs up to the low 20s. I'll see you soon.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. Loads coming up, including As the Phillip Schofield story rumbles on, we'll be speaking to the new chair of the Culture, Media and Sports Committee, who will now be putting the ITV bosses under the spotlight about this matter.
As Home Office civil servants threaten strikes over the government's Rwanda policy, we'll be asking who's running the country. We'll be having a debate with the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, and the leader of True and Fair Party, Gina Miller.
Plus, we'll be speaking to the former leader of UKIP as migrants have barricaded in a London hotel and protesting over their living conditions.
And as always, we want to hear from you, so to get involved in the show, email us on gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet us @gbnews. But first, here's the headlines with Ray.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. Here's the latest. At least 261 people have been killed and 850 injured in eastern India after 3 trains crashed, making it the country's deadliest rail accident in more than 2 decades. A passenger train went off the tracks and hit an oncoming train before colliding with a parked freight train. The army has been deployed to help evacuate the injured, with an extensive search and rescue operation ongoing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also set to visit the site in Odisha state. Phillip Schofield says he fears being spat on in the street after it was revealed that he had an affair with a younger colleague whilst presenting This Morning. In a new interview with The Sun, he admitted he's afraid to leave his house after resigning from ITV last week and being dropped by his talent agency. Schofield says he's getting by hour, with support from his daughters and friends. Animal rights activists are threatening to cancel or severely delay today's Epsom Derby. Animal Rising says the group will put their bodies on the line to shut down the race and protect the animals. They also want to spark a national debate about what they're calling our broken relationship with animals and nature. Surrey police are warning they will not tolerate any risks to public safety. Rail passengers are experiencing their 3rd day of major disruption this week as members of the ASLEF union go on strike. Workers across 15 train companies have walked out in an ongoing dispute over pay and conditions. ASLEF, which represents 96% of train drivers, warn it's unlikely that any services will be running at all. The disruption is affecting people attending the FA Cup final at Wembley and the Epsom Derby. Well, diesel prices fell by a record of almost 12 pence last month. That's the biggest drop for over 2 decades. The RAC says the average price of diesel went from 158.9 pence to 147 pence in May. It's the 7th consecutive month in which UK pump prices have fallen, reducing the cost of filling up a typical family car by £6.50. Petrol prices also fell by 3 pence last month. The UK ticket holder won more than £110 million in last night's Euro Millions jackpot. The unnamed winner is now richer than footballer Harry Kane, actor Daniel Radcliffe and singer Dua Lipa, according to the Sunday Times Rich List. Players are urged to check if they could be the lucky winner. And customers ordering groceries on delivery apps such as Deliveroo or Uber Eats are paying twice the price compared to buying them in store. Consumer group Which found that customers pay an average of 8% more for Morrison's groceries via Amazon due to convenience. In one case, unsalted butter cost 45% more on Amazon than in supermarkets, and Asda's own brand wine was £2 more expensive online. It comes amid a year of record increases in food inflation. Scotland's First Minister says there has never been a more important time for the country to become independent. Humza Yousaf claims that Westminster is failing to support people in Scotland during the cost of living crisis. He says SNPs would build an economy that puts working families first. The First Minister is also accusing Labour of sitting on their hands while Tories undermine the Scottish government. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to launch its counter-offensive against Russia. While speaking to the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Zelensky said he believes Ukraine will succeed in recapturing Russian-occupied territory, but does not know how long that might take. Kyiv previously said it needed more Western armoured vehicles before the fight back could begin. Russia currently holds swathes of Ukrainian territory in the east, south and southeast. And St Fagan's National Museum of History has been named the UK's best free day out by consumer group Which. The open-air attraction in Cardiff, which features 40 reconstructed buildings and scenes throughout history, achieved a customer score of 94%. Meanwhile, the National Railway Museum in York and the RAF Museum in Cosford tied for second place with a score of 91%. Which says the cost of living crisis means that finding cheap or free days out has never been more important to families. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get straight back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks there, Ray, and I'm glad you got the WhatsApp message about pink being the colour of the day. Now, as the Phillip Schofield saga continues to unfold, who knew what and when remains the main question.
Dame Carolyn McCall, ITV's chief executive, has been summoned to give evidence to the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee on the 14th of June.
Well, we're now joined by Dame Caroline Dinenage, Conservative MP for Gosport and the chair of the DCMS Select Committee. So, good morning to you. So can you tell us why you've called in ITV on the 12th of June? 14th of June.
Yes, so ITV were originally due to come in on this coming Tuesday anyway, because the committee's looking at the draft media bill. And because of everything that's been in the news recently that you'll all be aware of, there was a massive risk that that meeting would be dominated with committee's very genuine and understandable concerns about what's been going on at ITV with regard to safeguarding of junior staff members, with regard to whistleblowing, with regard to potential non-disclosure agreements. And so we decided to invite Dame Carolyn McCall in for a separate meeting so that we could cover off all those issues and this other really important bit of pre-legislative scrutiny doesn't get overwhelmed by what's been going on at ITV.
So what are you hoping to get, to find out? What are you hoping to get from ITV?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not a witch hunt. I don't really want to sort of get into the weeds of the individual cases around Phillip Schofield, but that case has raised some genuine concerns about workplace culture, about things like potential abuses of power. We know that among some of these big public service broadcasters, they have these kind of gods of broadcasting, these big celebrity media stars who have a disproportionate and very large amount of influence, and it's just really important to ensure that there's the right safeguarding in place to make sure that that influence isn't used to disproportionately affect the careers of other younger staff members, that there's the right systems and processes in place to protect staff who work at the organisation. It's the same for any organisation, but within the media there is this sort of disproportionate split of power, if you like. But also it's become apparent over the last few days that there are a number of attempts to draw attention to this to ITV bosses. So do they have the right systems and processes in place for whistleblowers? Are complaints being taken seriously? And then finally, I had a letter from Dame Carolyn McCall earlier this week saying that they have appointed a barrister, an independent barrister, to look into this. But it hasn't set out what the terms of reference are for that inquiry. It hasn't set out the timescales. And there are a number of, it almost sort of posed more questions than it answered. And that's why we really want to try and get to the bottom of some of the concerns that the committee have.
Caroline, what would you say to people who said that, well, unlike the BBC and unlike Channel 4, ITV's a private company subject to the law like everybody else, and therefore it's not really the business of a parliamentary select committee to be looking at its internal procedures?
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that argument, Phil, and what I would say in response is that ITV is also a public service broadcaster. Our committee and the public at large, I think, feel that it's really important that they do have a duty of care towards their staff, that this is a matter regarding issues of safeguarding, regarding issues of complaint handling, and that's of high importance. And the public must have confidence in public service broadcasters to make sure that they are robustly safeguarding the interests of their staff. So I do think this is something that both the committee and the public at large do have concerns with. Unfortunately, ITV do not have a very good track record over the last few years. We've had incidents with Love Island, with Caroline Flack, terrible, tragic incidents. We've had the Jeremy Kyle show. There seem to be lurching from one tragic disaster to another, and I do feel that it's time that Carolyn McCall came before the committee and answered a few questions.
Okay. Can I also ask what the process is going to be? Is this just going to be a one-off evidence session with ITV, or are you going to be producing a report on the back of this evidence session with your conclusions about what's happening, or is it just going to be a one-off standalone session?
At the moment, it's just a one-off standalone session. It was really because we have as I said, the draft media bill coming before us on Tuesday, and there was a real worry that would be completely overwhelmed by the committee with questions about what's been going on at ITV, and that would then not allow that piece of important legislation to be properly scrutinised. So I thought it was important to have a standalone meeting with Carolyn McCall. I hoped to do it on the same day, but she wasn't available, but she gave us an alternative date, which we've taken. At the moment, there's no, the ITV themselves are doing an independent inquiry. We'll keep an eye on that, and then if more work is necessary in the future, then of course we'll do it. But I don't want to sort of disproportionately use the committee's time for this. But there are certainly some unanswered questions.
And if other people wanted to come and give evidence about what's been going on, would you consider reopening it and doing something bigger on it, or are you just literally just going to speak to the chief executive and you don't really want to open it up any further than that at the moment?
Well, I mean, I think I'm as ever, Phil. I'm really keen that this committee serves the interests of the British people and Parliament. If people have evidence that they want to share with me via my email address, they're very welcome to send it in. And if I feel that would warrant a full inquiry, then of course that's what we will do at some point in the future. I've got quite a backlog of things that the committee's looking at. We've got the gambling white paper that we're about to start looking at, as I say, the draft media bill, and as we move further on in the year, I want to do more work on how artists are remunerated, people like musicians and writers. So there's we've obviously got issues with things like streaming and how that we've spoken about that before, how the money ends up.
Caroline Dinage, you've got a lot to do. We won't take up any more of your time, so thank you very much
and
indeed.
Congratulations on becoming the chairman of the committee. We're very pleased that you're the new chair of the committee, and we wish you well in your time in that position.
Well, she certainly got
off
to a fine start, a quick start there. Interesting to say, ITV might have appointed a barrister, but it looks like they haven't got proper terms of reference. Caroline said that, so she was concerned that they might not get the answers from that. Well, to look at today's top stories. We're delighted to say we're joined in the studio by member of the London Assembly, Sean Bailey, and senior political correspondent for The Guardian, Aubrey Allegretti. So, Sean, I don't know if you've got anything to say on that story. It certainly rumbled on for a long time, the Phillip Schofield story. The fact now that it's going to be a day's hearing at the Select Committee, maybe there's going to be a report at the end, maybe there's not. ITV have a lot of questions to answer.
I'm ambivalent about it going to Parliament. It's a private company. I don't think their safeguarding should land in Parliament. But because it is such a big story, we are now relying on MPs to actually get to the bottom of this. Did Holly know? Did the executives know? I mean, this is probably our best chance. I don't have much respect for an independent inquiry that's been commissioned by by ITV. They're effectively marking their own homework. So I'm now relying on Parliament to get me some answers.
Oh, and your story of the day.
So we're talking about a secret hub that ministers had to crack down on to have a look at people who were against lockdowns, which I think is one of the worst things I have ever heard in my life. The idea that the government would take its time to look at, you know, what individual people are doing against the policy it has and have a unit in the government to do that, I think is terrible. And we're in a country now where polarisation is the real issue, so have issues of trust. And this, for me, will give people, conspiracy theorists, a real belief around the conspiracies they hold.
Aubrey, you had views on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't terribly surprised about it, to be honest, because the government actually spends a lot of time monitoring what critics and even journalists write about its activities and its policies. This is not specific to COVID. So the government does a lot of what's called media monitoring.
Yeah, they're like, how did the policy land? What did the public think of it?
Yeah,
so
and what are commentators and journalists saying, which seems to be what's going on here. Although there is a sort of concern that the government had this sort of trusted flagger status where it sort of gets fast-tracked when it thinks that there's problematic content on social media platforms, that it can flag that with social media companies and potentially get it removed faster. Now, we all know there was a lot of disinformation flying around during COVID. Some of that certainly a bad thing. Others potentially up for debate about whether or not there was, you know, pros and cons to policy. But you can't deny that it was important for the government to be able to monitor what was going on. It happens anyway. It wasn't to do with COVID. So I'm not that surprised by the story.
The thing is, though, Aubrey, is that I think the thing in the story that struck me is about the type of people that they were monitoring. Yeah, that's right. So, for example, they weren't monitoring necessarily, well, they may well have been, but they weren't just monitoring people who were just trying to put out absolute nonsense and cause trouble. On that list was people like Professor Carl Hennigan, who's the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University. Now, surely they shouldn't be trying to discredit people like Carl Hennigan, who's an accepted authority in that particular field. They might have been wanting to listen to what he was saying and take notice of what he was saying, but they didn't seem to be doing that. It seemed as if they were more interested in discrediting the types of things he was saying.
I'm not sure that they're really talking about discrediting. I mean, what they're really talking about is monitoring what's going on and flagging if there is a problem. I mean, nobody's suggesting that anything that was incredibly fair that this person said was incorrectly flagged. All they're saying is,
I think at the time it was closing down debate.
Yeah, we don't know that.
For them about children, about vaccinations, about going to school. They closed down debate.
And we don't know. Listen, there is a very big difference between monitoring how a policy's landed and contacting IPs and saying you need to shut this person down. Look, I was a person who thought that the lockdowns needed to happen. Maybe they were too long, maybe it's too many of them. But the idea that there's someone in government contacting people saying, look, we've had enough of this point of view, shut them down, I think is sinister. A democracy is based on the ability for people to have free and fair exchange, and this seems like somebody short-circuiting that process.
Can I ask you, Aubrey, during the pandemic, obviously, you know, you're a prominent member of the media. Was any attempts made by the government to say to newspapers, look, we'd really appreciate help on this, or don't cause trouble on this, or whatever? Did any of those discussions take place between the newspaper media and the government about what information you should and shouldn't be giving out?
Nothing that doesn't take place anyway. I mean, there's a very natural rhythm of sort of dialogue between the government, MPs, special advisors and journalists all the time. And certainly at the start of the pandemic, I think the media sort of slightly transformed its role, and when there was so much uncertainty, turned into a sort of, we were trying to perform more of a public service by echoing the messages of the government when it really needed to get its message across as quickly as possible. But that is not to say at all that we were lent on in any more way or that we bowed to any particular type of pressure. We still tried as effectively as possible to scrutinise those decisions. And it's been very helpful, in fact, seeing the sort of Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages. They are shining a light on exactly how those decisions were made that we otherwise wouldn't see.
Another story, Phil?
Well, I wanted you to do your one about the Full Monty.
Oh, OK. Well, this is a completely different story that we're covering here, but it's about Hugo Spear. Remember the film, The Full Monty? He was the lead actor in it, and they were going to, 25 years later on, do a TV series, and he was going to have a part in it, only he has no longer. And he said, I lost my job, my money and my reputation for being seen undressed in my trailer on the set of The Full Monty. Now, I said all his mates think this is, like, ludicrous. They thought it was a joke, but this is what happened. He was getting undressed in his own trailer, and he's lost his job because of it. Now, obviously, I read down a little bit longer what happened there. He said, wait a minute, but somebody walked in on him. So the question is, you're in your own trailer, you are getting changed. That could extend now to your home, and somebody sees you getting undressed. Is that enough to be considered as sort of inappropriate behaviour?
I'd have to say no. If you're in a private place where it's not unusual for you to get undressed, I think they need to. The question needs to be asked: what are you doing in here? Not what am I getting undressed?
And the only reason I ask this because I'm one of these people who always say you must draw the curtains. My curtains are never open. If we're going to get changed or dressed, the curtains must be closed. The lights are off until the curtains are closed. Because I've always been super aware. Are you super aware? Do you get changed with the curtains open or closed? Are you super aware of that? I'm super
very
aware
relaxed,
of this.
but maybe after reading this story, I should be a bit more careful.
Well, there's a cautionary tale. Are you super relaxed?
I am quite prudish, according to my wife. So yeah, I'm super aware. But the point being, if that's not an extraordinary place. If they were in the street or somewhere public, the questions need to be asked. But that's a private space, and someone has come into that.
Yeah.
So actually, the question needs to be asked in the other direction.
It was on the film, The Full Monty. I have to say to it, that's why everybody.
But his life has been ruined, and this goes to deeper questions about. Yes, we want to believe people, but we do need to do something about sources. We do need to do something about if you accuse someone, they're innocent until you're proven guilty. They've written this whole man's life off on a whim, and I think
yes, they said somebody's seen you undressed in your trailer. He said, I couldn't believe it. I said, OK, but that's my trailer.
Yeah.
That's where I get dressed and undressed. And he said, it's serious. And I said, whoa, stop there. What's serious? This isn't going to, and this is where he ended his job.
Should he have locked him? I think he should have locked the door.
Maybe he should have.
Or maybe someone should have knocked on the door.
He wasn't particularly doing it.
They did knock on the door. He said, wait a minute. And they walked in.
Straight away, if he said, wait a minute, then I would ask them, well, why did you walk in?
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I'm one of those people who say, draw the curtains, protect yourself, because this now, ITV can't do anything over what's happening with Phillip Schofield, but people can get involved in all of this. It's crazy, isn't it, where people get involved and where they don't. I don't know what anybody else is thinking.
There'd be more people laughing than crying if they saw me getting undressed, to be perfectly honest. So
it was just if they were shocked,
I don't think I need to worry about it. Sean, Aubrey, thanks ever so much. We'll see you in the next hour.
Now, coming up, after a TikToker admitted to stalking Chelsea footballers and a glitch on Facebook revealed how many people were cyber-stalking, we will be joined by investigative journalist Nicole Madigan to tell her story when she was stalked.
And don't forget to get in touch with us. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet us at gbnews.
Did you draw the curtains? Did you draw the curtains?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. The time now is 10:26.
After a female TikToker admitted to stalking Premier League footballers Mason Mount and Billy Gilmore, just how widespread is the issue of stalking?
Well, we're joined now by investigative journalist Nicole Madigan, who was stalked for over 3 years and has written a book about her story. So, yes, we're reading about stalking in the papers. It's usually about high-profile people. Maybe they've got fascinated with footballers. But how sort of widespread is stalking?
It's incredibly widespread. And I think the reason we don't quite realise how widespread it is because nobody really talks about it unless they are high profile. And so in my case, I didn't talk about it much at all for the large part of those 3 years. But once I started my research, I discovered it's incredibly widespread. But most victims are suffering in silence.
Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do go through and what you in particular went through?
So I was stalked online for 3 years by a woman who used to date my now husband. She sort of came onto the scene after I'd been seeing him for a few months. So this is someone I'd never met, still haven't met, and who wasn't in his life at that time. So essentially it's a stranger to me, stalking me. And this came through multiple avenues via the internet, so many different messaging services and in public as well. Also contacting my family and friends and impersonating me and that sort of thing. So it impacts you from a number of different ways, mentally, psychologically, socially and financially. There's a huge impact that people just don't quite realise.
So this wasn't like the lady who was the TikToker because she was fascinated and had an attraction and wanted to date these people, the different types of stalker. This one was because she'd been rejected. So it's a fixation on you and what, trying to destroy you, your life and your relationship.
Absolutely. So in the beginning, it certainly seemed like the focus was on my relationship, so destroying that. Over time, it kind of evolved, I suppose, and the fixation landed just on me and just finding ways to cause fear, always alluding to something being around the corner and eventually sort of implying that she was physically stalking me as well. I don't know whether that was the case, but she certainly found out where I lived and a lot of personal information about me.
The Netflix series You has been criticised for romanticising stalking. I don't know if you've seen it. If you have, what's your view? Do you agree with that? Is that partly the problem, the way that these things can be portrayed in the media?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, look, like everybody, I had read that book, you know, before it became a television show that everybody got quite into. But I think what the television show did is made the stalker quite appealing and quite alluring, and almost as though, you know, it's a prize to be the object of his obsession. And I think, you know, society at large does really glorify obsession and, you know, a really dedicated, committed, you know, focus on trying to attract someone. And I think many movies, in fact, do that very thing.
I wondered, is it mainly women who do stalking, or is it men who do stalking, or do they do different types of stalking?
So the research that I undertook, which was looking at a lot of different literature and talking to a lot of experts, shows that most stalking is actually perpetrated by men. So it's sort of like an 80%, 20% ratio. So definitely more men, but I think different types of stalkers fit into different categories. So I think, you know, domestic violence type stalking is definitely more men. Predatory stalking, where there's an attack coming at the end of it, definitely more men. But I think this sort of resentful stalker, which we're talking about, you know, in my case, it's kind of a bit more evenly split. So I think it depends on the motivation behind the stalker.
Yeah, and 3 years was a long time, because I looked up the different types of stalking, knowing that you were coming on and you'd done your research. There was the rejected stalker, the resentful stalker, which is a vendetta against, it would have been your boyfriend or husband rather than you. An intimacy stalker, they feel you should be together, so they're fantasists, as well as predatory stalkers, and they're more spying on you, and that could be sort of more violent. But you, being stalked, wouldn't have known which one of those it was.
No, so for me, and look, I hadn't even put the label on it as I was going through it, because of course, you know, we tend to think of stalking as that predatory stalker, the sort of the man in the bushes or following you around secretly, breathing into the phone and that sort of thing. So look, I didn't know, and I was interested to discover that when I interviewed Professor Paul Mullen, who developed those 5 profiles that you just spoke of, he put this woman in the category of the resentful stalker, because her focus was on me. So although she might have felt rejected, you know, her goal was really to cause fear and anguish and turmoil for me.
Nicole, thank you very much indeed for coming on our show today and speaking to us about that, because it is a phenomenon that is growing and made much easier by being online. And the story the other week about Facebook, there was a glitch on Facebook that it revealed how many people were actually stalking somebody. Unfortunately, it sent them all a join friends with, so the stalkers weren't happy in that instance.
I mean, Parliament did increase the maximum sentence for stalking fairly recently, but I think it probably still isn't taken as seriously as it ought to be, given the impact it has on the victims. Now, coming up, as Home Office staff threaten to strike over the government's Rwanda deportation policy, we're asking, should civil servants be able to go on strike if they oppose the government's policies? We'll be joined by the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, and leader of the True and Fair Party, Gina Miller, to debate that issue.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop
failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. Now, the Home Office civil servants are threatening strike action over the government's Rwanda deportation policy and small boats legislation.
The Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents nearly 16,000 staff in the Home Office and Border Force, said it was going to have to consider industrial action if members were forced to implement measures that they believe to be unlawful.
But should they have the right to do this? And the question remains, who is running the country?
Well, we're delighted to be joined now by Richard Tice, leader of Reform UK. Richard, thanks for joining us. Just address that particular point that the union made. If the civil servants think that they're being asked to pursue a policy that's unlawful, if they're not supposed to go on strike, what should they be doing?
Well, it's very clear, Phil and Esther, good morning, that the civil servants have to abide by the law of the land. And a judge has already ruled that the policy is lawful. I understand it's going to the Court of Appeal for a further ruling. If the law of the land judges and rule that it's lawful, then they need to do their job that they have to do and carry out the policy of the representatives who've been put there by the voters. And if they refuse to do that, it's very simple. They're in breach of contract, and every single one of them should be dismissed immediately without any compensation. Guess what? All of a sudden, actually, it's the ministers in charge, not them, for running the country. I suspect they'll then carry out the policy.
Now, your sound was going in and out there, Richard. So can I just check? You said if you're not following what the government of the day is doing, those civil servants should be dismissed. Am I right in saying that's what you said? They need to be dismissed.
That's right. If they're because they're in breach of contract, and anybody who's in breach of employment contract can be dismissed by the employer. That's the legal position, and that's what should happen in this situation.
So are these civil servants just getting too big for their boots?
Well, I think we've already seen that in a number of situations. For example, over the absurd removal of Dominic Raab. Anybody who's read the report can show that actually he was just trying to get some stuff done on behalf of the British taxpayer that put him there. And I think many of these civil servants, they seem to think that they could run unelected policy rather than the on behalf of the people.
Do you know what, Richard? I think we're going to have to end the interview there because it's breaking up a little bit, the sound. But I want to thank you for joining us, and I think you made your points very clear there. These shouldn't be doing that. They should be dismissed. But we're now joined by the leader of the True and Fair Party, Gina Miller. Hello, Gina. I'm presuming you heard there what Richard Tice had to say. So what do you think about the civil servants? Is this the right action for them to be taking? Surely not.
Good morning, Esther and Phil. Thank you for inviting me on. Yes, I did hear what Richard had to say, but I'm afraid Richard is not understanding the law as it stands, in that, yes, the High Court has ruled that Parliament is sovereign, and of course it would do, Parliament is sovereign. But the issue here and the concern is about international law, and the civil servants have a right to strike, and as long as they go through the right process and there is a consensus, they can strike. And what they're concerned about is that they could be prosecuted if the Rwanda policy, and actually the illegal migration bill as well, proved to be unlawful in international law. And this is not just a concern of the civil servants. You've got the Law Society, the Bar Council, the UN High Commissioner are all expressing concerns. And what it is that it's about asylum laws and human rights laws that could well be the concern here.
But isn't the job of the civil service, Gina, to implement the will of the democratically elected government? And if the democratically elected government, backed by the UK Parliament, decides that it wants to pursue a particular policy, isn't it the job of civil servants not to go on strike, but to find a way to make sure that that policy can be implemented and can be implemented in a way which is consistent with the law?
It has to be consistent with the law, and that's exactly their point. But of course, you're right. The civil service is there to deliver the policies. They have to be impartial and deliver the policies of whichever sitting government it is. But this is different. What they're talking about is they do have a right to strike. That is also legal. But they're talking about their concerns about being prosecuted themselves if these policies were found to be illegal in international law. And if you were working in a food factory and you thought there was something being put into the food that was harmful to the public, or in a car factory that actually broke the law, even though your bosses said, yes, you should do it, I think you would be very concerned. And their concern is about the legality in international law.
But Gina, if you're not happy with the policy that the government's implementing, then perhaps a career in the civil service isn't for you. I mean, when you join the civil service, you join knowing that your job and your duty is to implement the will of that particular government, which whatever particular party it is that's in government, that's your job. That's what you sign up for when you join the civil servant. It's not to say, well, I'm going to pick and choose which policies I happen to agree with or don't agree with or don't like or think might be a bit dodgy or might cause problem in the law. If you feel so strongly about policies, then perhaps those people should be standing for election rather than joining the civil service.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Phil, that the civil service is there to deliver on the sitting government of the day. They are there to execute, but they're also the mechanism that it understands the legalities, understands the boundaries, and understands the practicalities of policies. And, what they're saying is they do not want to be bullied into doing something that is illegal and would end up with them being prosecuted. But in all of this,
Gina,
they have not said they're going to
viewers are
strike yet.
concerned about
there is no
now.
consensus yet for them to strike.
Gina, I think what our viewers are concerned about is that they're feeling this is an excuse. They're seeing a very militant or politicised civil service, and there seems to be a bit of a track record on this, whether it's removing ministers, not doing what they like. So do you believe these civil servants have grounds for what they're doing or not?
If I look at what the Bar Council is saying, the Law Society is saying, the UN High Commissioner is saying, the International Courts of Human Rights are saying, I think there are grave concerns about bringing in legislation and plans that would actually see people who are trafficked being sent away from our country. I think there are really serious issues with this legislation, these plans. And what the government should be doing is your government should be bringing about proper plans that actually can be executed and the civil service can actually deliver. I mean, we've got, since the last election,
we'll
the
bring
number
this
of
to
asylum
a
have tripled
close
under your government.
now. But Gina,
what are you
your
doing
answer
about that?
in short was yes, you do think they can do that. And then I'm going to put that out to our viewers. Thank you for joining us. Do you think this is right? Should civil servants be able to go on strike, or should they be implementing the law of the country? Send us your views on that.
I guess the issue with what Gina was saying in terms of what the views of, the UN and the Bar Council and whatever, is that they're not employed to implement government policy. I mean, if they want to have an opinion that they don't like what the government's doing, that's fine. But it just seems a bit bizarre to me that civil servants who are joined up to the civil service, knowing that their job is to implement the government's policy, are talking about going on strike because they don't like the government's policy. Seems a... Anyway, let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Now, at 3 p.m. today, the FA Cup final kicks off. Fans from across Manchester will be hoping that it is their beloved side that will lift the trophy when the final whistle blows.
Droves of fans are currently driving down to Wembley. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson has been following them on the route. He stopped by Warwick Service Station for us.
We're here at Warwick Services, where the first of the Manchester United coaches have started coming down on their way down to Wembley. The atmosphere is incredible. There's already a buzz in the air. This is, of course, the first time that there's been a Manchester derby in the FA Cup final, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Manchester United looking to win their second domestic trophy of the season. Of course, City looking to do that treble if they win today and then win the Champions League, and, of course, match Manchester United when they got that treble years and years ago. But the atmosphere is already fantastic. The security operation, the policing is also quite big as well. When we get down to Wembley, more than 1,000 Metropolitan Police officers are going to be making sure everyone has a safe and enjoyable day, as well as, of course, Greater Manchester Police as well, mixing in with those crowds. You've got 2 separate fan zones. Fans have also been advised to take different routes down, with the Manchester United fans coming down here, stopping at places like Warwick Services on the M40. Manchester City fans advised to take the M1, just to make sure everyone's safe and enjoyable. But the atmosphere and the tension and the buzz is already here on the way down to Wembley.
Thanks ever so much for that, Jack. Everyone looks to be enjoying themselves now. Half of them won't be enjoying themselves on the way back, will they? Although I always thought, to be perfectly honest, I always thought all the Manchester...
Travelling with hope.
I thought all the Manchester United fans lived in London anyway, but maybe that's cruel.
Now, a group of asylum seekers have been staging a pavement protest after refusing to sleep 4 people in a hotel room in central London, prompting anger from the neighbours.
The group has rejected concessions made by the Home Office and has now been handed a 24-hour ultimatum to accept their hotel accommodation or be made homeless. Joining us now to discuss this is former UKIP leader Henry Bolton. Henry, thanks so much for joining us. What do you make of this? It seems quite extraordinary on the one hand that people who are seeking refuge are complaining about their hotel accommodation, but I guess on the other side of the argument is that maybe trying to squeeze 4 people into a London hotel room is a bit excessive. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I stand pretty much where you've just described. I mean, the first thing is that, these are all young men. There are no families there, no women, no children. They're young men. And that just, for me, reinforces the fact that these people came here as part of a choice. And they are economic migrants. Wherever they've come from is irrelevant in that sense. They've come to the UK because they thought they were going to have, the land of milk and honey to an extent. So I've got, to a degree, I've not got a great deal of sympathy with them. But on the other hand, this is also illustrative of the failure of government to have a reasonable plan. First of all, they're in Ilford for 2 years. Well, why haven't they been processed in that 2 years? Well, I'll tell you why. Because the government, we know the government acts 21,000 police officers. Yes, they've recruited another 20,000, but they did a similar thing starting in 2010 with the agencies and the personnel who are responsible for processing asylum claims. What they've not done is replace those numbers. What they've also done is outsource some of it. They've lowered the standards of training for those people. And so, of course, we're going to have a problem processing increasing numbers. Problem number 1. Problem number 2, I think we've all been thinking that this whole scheme of putting people in hotels is simply unsustainable. We farm people out all across the country. It's very difficult to keep tabs on them. It's very difficult to provide them with any sort of medical or welfare support in a coherent, coordinated manner. This is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
I've dealt with refugees.
Lots of people are saying, Henry, lots of people are saying, gosh, talk about ungrateful. here we are as a country letting people come in, putting them up in hotels, paying for bed and breakfast for them, when other people in our country are having difficulty paying the mortgage. But I think you hit on a point there. People are coming to this country thinking it is the land of milk and honey. Is it not time we took those pictures that the country is full up, the hotels are full up, and need to be putting that around the world, as in, there's no point coming to the UK. We can't put you up in your individual rooms. There will be 4 or 6 to a room.
Esther, I agree with you, but at the same time, we've got 2 other problems going on concurrently. We've got a whole bunch of people who are putting out the contrary message. We've got people in the UK, campaigners, organisations, charities, and not just in the UK, also in countries like Italy and so on, who are saying to migrants, you are welcome, you will be supported, and even if the government doesn't support you, we will. And to illustrate that a little bit, in a slightly bigger picture, this problem is only going to get worse. Italy, so far this year, has had, just Italy, 47,000 people land on its shores. Last year, it was 22,000 by this time. It's over double. Now, those people are being attracted not just by our rather laissez-faire approach to this and our failure to put the British people and British economy and British interests first, but also the wider continent of Europe is doing the same thing. And of course,
Henry
the proportion of those people landing in Europe.
Thank you very much indeed. You've absolutely raised a point there, and I think that's why Rishi Sunak was meeting with all the other sort of European countries to say we've got to stop this now. But look, we had a poll earlier. Is it right to make some refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers share rooms even when the government's paying £6 million a day to house those migrants? And the result was a whopping 88% said yes, they should be sharing rooms, and only 12% said no. I'm just looking at this poll here. Over nearly 6,000 people voted straight away, and that's what they're saying. It is right for government to try and reduce the bill, and they should be sharing rooms.
I must say, if people are genuinely fleeing war and persecution, even if they're sharing, you'd think they'd be quite pleased with a hotel room, wouldn't you?
Central London.
Yeah, if you're genuinely fleeing war and persecution, you'd think you'd be quite happy with
that could be a problem in itself. Why would you send somebody to central London when you know everything is much more expensive and much smaller? But anyway, you've had your say, and they should be sharing rooms. The government's got to get a grip of this. Phil?
It's the second day of the Epsom Derby horse racing festival, but there are concerns about animal rising disrupting the day, as up to 1,000 protesters are due to descend on the course.
Well, we're joined now by our national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Tell us what's happening there now.
Yeah, it's the main day, or if you for people who aren't into horse racing, the way I look at it is yesterday was Christmas Eve, the kind of build-up to the big day, Christmas Day, Derby Day, which is what we're looking forward to today. The Derby running at 1:30, a little bit earlier because of the FA Cup final later this afternoon. Of course, a lot of publicity has got into looking at potentially protests from animal rising disrupting the racing action, which didn't happen yesterday. So let's look back at yesterday's action with Nevin Truesdale, who's the CEO of the Jockey Club. Nevin, really good to talk to you again.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning.
First of all, you're looking fantastic.
Thank you
by the
very
way.
much.
Look at how smart you're looking.
I've got my British and Irish Lions badge on here as well.
Loving it. Yesterday, no disruption. You must be thankful for that. And I noticed that around the course, the extra number of stewards, marshals, police officers were very vigilant.
Yeah, obviously, Paul, we were fantastically pleased with how yesterday went. All our teams, security, police did an absolutely brilliant job, and thankfully the day passed off with no disruption whatsoever, which was fantastic. As you say, we've got a lot of extra security on site. Yesterday was no different to today, people here will notice that, and I think obviously there's a very good and obvious reason for that, given the threat of illegal disruptive protest, which we hope won't happen. There is a legal protest area for animal rising, which is happening now outside the racecourse, and that's something that we welcome, something we've helped facilitate. So we hope that today will pass off exactly as yesterday did, and some great racing to look forward to today as well.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, how was yesterday in terms of, I don't know if you've got any numbers in terms of footfall. There is obviously a cost of living crisis, but did you know, and the train strikes as well?
Yeah, and you've referenced both those things. The crowd yesterday was about 16,000 on the paying side, and then more on the hill watching for free. And this is one of the actually makes this event unique. You can come and watch one of Britain's top sporting events for free in the middle of the hills. So it's a lovely day here. Anybody in the local area who still wants to turn up, you still tickets on the gate, but you can watch for free on the hills, and there's plenty going on there. Family zone, all sorts of different things happening there, which is great, and so much to look forward to there. But yeah, you are right. I mean, the crowd was down a little bit yesterday, 16,000 in total, as I say. Cost of living crisis definitely impacting our numbers as a leisure business a bit, and also the train strikes having a much more significant impact from those. Epsom has got 3 train stations within reasonably close proximity to it, and a lot of people, for the Derby and the Oaks, they do arrive by train. So there's no doubt that affected us yesterday.
Yeah, and just a final word on the racing. Why is the Derby so special, and particularly the two stories, the main stories that we're looking forward to this afternoon when the race gets underway at 1:30? Yeah, I mean, the Derby is one of the iconic flat race of the calendar, which I'm sure Philip and Esther will be watching avidly later on. It is you think of the classics as the Grand Slams, like in tennis and golf. This is the Wimbledon of those classics, or the Open of those classics, which is great. And we've got some brilliant stories to look forward to. Frankie Dettori riding in his last Derby before his retirement. He won the Oaks yesterday. He won the Coronation Cup yesterday. He's got the chance to be the first jockey since Ryan Moore in 2010 to do the Oaks Derby double in the one weekend. So we're looking forward to that. Arrest, I think, has got a good chance for Juddmonte, who also owned Chaldine, who won the 2,000 guineas earlier in the season. And then a much more poignant story, and one we're all thinking of, Jessie Harrington and her battle with breast cancer. She would be the first female trainer to win the race if Spruill wins the race. So we're all hoping that he has a good run, and we're all thinking of Jessie and her family as she battles very bravely, and all thinking of her. Fantastic. What a fantastic story it would be if she won it. Listen, really good to talk to you, Nevin. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Looking forward to the race yesterday. And as we heard there, Frankie Dettori riding a horse ironically called Arrest. Speaking of which, Animal Rising, the protest group, claiming that there have been a number of arrests outside. We are checking that with Surrey Police. But yeah, we're looking forward to the racing later.
Thanks for that, Paul. I will take that as your tip for the race then. Arrest, ridden by Frankie Dettori in his last ever Derby. Thank you for that.
And we'll be bringing the latest on those arrests as and when we hear them, if that's correct. Well, we'll also be talking to top showbiz agent Jonathan Shalit about the Phillip Schofield fallout and ITV's response to it.
And are millennials secret capitalists? And what can the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak do to win them over?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. Loads to come, including reaction to the Phillip Schofield storm. Celebrity showbiz agent Professor Jonathan Shalit, chairman of the Intertalent Rights Group, will be joining us.
And a new report by the think tank Onward shows that millennials are the first generation that might not become conservative as they grow older. But are they really shy capitalists? That's what we want to know. And if you offered them tax cuts, would they vote Conservative? James Cowling, founder of Next Gen Tories, joins us.
And with the FA Cup final kicking off later and the Soap Awards tonight, we'll be joined by our fantastic duo, Aidan McGee and Hayley Palmer, to give us the latest from the worlds of sport and showbiz.
And as always, we want to hear from you. So do get involved in the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.com or tweet us at gbnews. But first, it's time for the headlines with Ray Addison.
Thank you both. It's 1 minute past 11, our top story this morning. At least 261 people have been killed and 850 injured in eastern India after a passenger train derailed, striking 2 others. The death toll makes it the country's deadliest rail incident in more than 2 decades. The army has been deployed to help evacuate the injured, with an extensive search and rescue operation ongoing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also set to visit the site in Odisha state. Phillip Schofield says he fears being spat on in the street after it was revealed that he'd had an affair with a younger colleague whilst presenting This Morning. In a new interview with The Sun, he admitted he's afraid to leave his house after resigning from ITV and being dropped by his talent agency. Schofield says he is getting by hour with support from his daughters and friends. Animal rights activists are threatening to cancel or severely delay today's Epsom Derby. Animal Rising says the group will put their bodies on the line to shut down the race and protect the animals. They also want to spark a national debate about what they're calling our broken relationship with animals and nature. Surrey Police are warning that they will not tolerate any risks to public safety. Well, rail passengers are experiencing their 3rd day of major disruption this week as members of the ASLEF union go on strike. Workers across 15 train companies have walked out in an ongoing dispute over pay and conditions. ASLEF, which represents 96% of train drivers, warn it's unlikely any services will run. The disruption is affecting people attending the FA Cup final at Wembley and the Epsom Derby. Diesel prices fell by a record of almost 12 pence last month. That's the biggest drop for over 2 decades. The RAC says the average price of diesel went from 158.9 pence to 147 pence in May. It's the 7th consecutive month in which UK pump prices have fallen, reducing the cost of filling up a typical family car by £6.50. Petrol prices also fell by 3 pence last month. A UK ticket holder won more than £110 million in last night's Euro Millions jackpot. The unnamed winner is now richer than footballer Harry Kane, actor Daniel Radcliffe and singer Dua Lipa, according to the Sunday Times Rich List. Players are being urged to check if they could be the lucky winner. Customers ordering groceries on delivery apps such as Deliveroo or Uber Eats are paying twice the price compared to buying them in-store. Consumer group Which found that customers pay an average of 8% more for Morrison's groceries via Amazon due to convenience. In one case, unsalted butter cost 45% more on Amazon than in supermarkets, and Asda's own brand wine was £2 more expensive online. It comes amid a year of record increases in food inflation. Scotland's First Minister says there has never been a more important time for the country to become independent. Humza Yousaf claims that Westminster is failing to support people in Scotland during the cost of living crisis. He says SNPs would build an economy that puts working families first. First Minister is also accusing Labour of sitting on their hands while Tories undermine the Scottish government. International news, and President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Ukraine is ready to launch its counter-offensive against Russia. While speaking to the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Zelensky said he believes Ukraine will succeed in recapturing Russian-occupied territory, but he admitted he does not know how long that could take. Kyiv previously said it needs more Western armoured vehicles before the fight back could begin. Russia currently holds swathes of Ukrainian territory in the east, south and southeast. And St Fagan's National Museum of History has been named the UK's best free day out by consumer group Which. The open-air attraction in Cardiff, which features 40 reconstructed buildings and scenes throughout history, achieved a customer score of 94%. Well, meanwhile, the National Railway Museum in York and the RAF Museum in Cosford tied for second place with a score of 91%, which says the cost of living crisis means finding cheap or free days out has never been more important to families. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Let's get back to Esther and Phil.
Thanks, Ray. And obviously we're bringing the story as it unfolds there at Epsom Derby. Are animal rising? Will they? Is there a rest going on there? Will they be protesting? 1,000 of them were meant to descend. And we also put out a poll earlier on, and that was, are animal activists that plan to disrupt the Epsom Derby today? Do these protesters really have the animals' interests in mind, or are they ignorant about horse racing and just attention-seeking? Thousands voted on this, and it looks like 86% they are attention-seeking. It's not that they are animal lovers. What do you think, Phil? Were you surprised with that score? 86 said attention-seekers, 86%.
Not really. I think they are ignorant. I mean, when they protested against the Grand National, they said they didn't like the fact that they were jumping fences and all the rest of it to the Derby. They probably don't know the Derby's a flat race. There's no hurdles or fences.
They don't want any horse racing ever again.
I suspect they don't even know that, to be perfectly honest. I think they know absolutely nothing about the subject.
Or how well they're looked after, those horses.
Absolutely.
But as the
Philip... I was well looked after as well. What
are you trying to say? I look after you well enough, but just not as well as a racehorse. As the Phillip Schofield saga continues to unfold, who knew what and when does remain the main question.
Earlier on, we spoke to the chairman of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee about this, and we're joined now by showbiz agent Professor Jonathan Shallett, chairman of the Intertalent Rights Group, to discuss it further. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. You've been involved in the industry for many a year. Have you ever seen anything quite like this situation with ITV and Phillip Schofield and the fallout from it?
Well, if one's brutally honest, yes. I mean, these media storms happen quite regularly. They explode, they're massive for a short period of time, they disappear. And I think this media storm is exactly that. It's a media storm, way bigger than the actual issue, and it will disappear fairly quickly.
Well, you say that. It hasn't. It's rumbled on now for a couple of weeks. They always say in the world of politics, which you know about as well, if you're still the story 7 days later, you've usually gone. But we're not really hearing anything here from ITV. Are they behind the curve?
Well, first of all, the person who is the centre of the story has gone. That's Phillip Schofield, and the story is continuing this weekend because of the interview he gave this week. As to your other question you just asked, Esther, are ITV, did you say behind the curve?
Yeah.
The answer is no.
Not ahead of it.
I mean, first of all, we're looking at a matter that really happened in 2020, 3 years ago. We deal with all the major broadcasters and media companies around the world, and ITV are very much have been ahead of the curve for a long time. I mean, clearly I've seen about the independent inquiry with the barrister, and I'll ask about processes, but I actually know from personal experience the processes ITV have in place are absolutely excellent when it comes to welfare for talent, staff and people associated with the company. So I think, yes, it's a very important question about what happened in 2020. However, the bigger picture of ITV being, well, where they are on the curve is, that's one thing I can safely say, they're very much where they should be on the curve.
And Jonathan, you've been involved in representing some major stars over many years. Phillip Schofield said in his interview that his career was finished. Do you think that's true? Do you think his career is finished? And what do you think it all means for Holly Willoughby and her career?
Well, I think they're, again, two entirely separate questions. Phillip Schofield's career is finished. I think the most important thing, he hasn't broken the law. So therefore, absolutely, today is a very dark day for him, or the last few weeks have been very dark for him. And I also do share some thoughts that the trolling he's now receiving is completely disproportionate. He's being punished in a way that has really battered his life beyond imagination, but he will pick himself up, and in time broadcasters will give him more work. So I think the one thing he should hold on to as he looks at how dark his life is today is that time heals, and so long as it shows genuine remorse, which I believe he seems to be, the pendulum will swing and he'll get more opportunities. So, and that's happened to many people. Look at Jeremy Kyle. You know, when that terrible thing happened, when someone died on his show, he was out, and now he's back again working with a rival broadcaster, GBNews, and a regular columnist in a major newspaper. People do come back, as long as they don't break the law. That's a very different question. What was the second question?
Holly
Willoughby. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why Holly shouldn't continue her career. I mean, she's made absolutely clear she didn't know. No one has been able to show she did know, so therefore you're innocent, you're proven guilty. She's one of Britain's best broadcasters. I don't represent her, so I can say that very objectively. There's a lot of love for Holly. She's very experienced. She understands TV, and she will come back and continue as long as she wants.
Jonathan Charlotte, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. It's interesting what some of our GB viewers are saying. He said, although I don't condone what Phillip Schofield has done, I do think we need to stop reporting it now. They're saying he's clearly in a bad place. And David says, personally, I think this morning needs to be taken off air until this unpleasantness goes away.
Interesting to get Jonathan's perspective, isn't it? And he's been in the industry for years.
He knows what he's talking about.
He also does a hell of a lot of work. You probably don't know, he's also chairman of the Variety charity, the children's charity, so he does an awful lot of good work as well. Great to have his perspective.
But now let's take a look at the stories of the week. We're delighted to be joined again in the studio by former chair of the Labour London Assembly, Sean Bailey, and the senior political correspondent for The Guardian, Aubrey Allegretti. We're going to start with you this time, Aubrey.
Yes, we've had all sorts of warnings emblazoned over the front pages this week about AI and the sort of threat to humanity, the kind of things that it could do and the terrible things it could do. So we've heard warnings about, for example, AI bots potentially creating their own chemical weapons. So it's quite interesting to read a story in The Times today about Rishi Sunak wanting to, ahead of his trip to the US next week, set up a watchdog to sort of look after and set up some guardrails around AI and its development. He's going to be discussing it with the US president next week when he goes to Washington, D.C. And we're sort of thin on details for now, but it is, I suppose, a good thing that some countries are at least talking about getting together.
Now, is that for the UK, or was he thinking that it would be the global watchdog and he'd want it centred in the UK? Was he trying to lead the charge globally there?
Yes, every sort of politician probably says this country will lead the way in this field. But no, Rishi Sunak wants it to be a global watchdog that's headquartered in the UK. And it's interesting because there's a company called Anthropic, which is based in San Francisco, and it's got $1.45 billion, but it's chosen the UK for its first big office outside the US. And it's trying to create a sort of rival to ChatGPT. So there are clearly lots of companies like this that want to come to the UK and invest in the UK. So it's in the Prime Minister's interests to make sure that AI is sort of safe here, but also that no other countries can use it for nefarious activities.
Well, I think that's a positive story, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah.
I think that's good. We're leading the charge, we're leading the way, and realise that we've got to get a grip on this AI.
Look, he's correct. It will only work if it's international, because if we're all ferreting away, behaving ourselves, and somebody else isn't, it makes no difference. It's correct. The UK is probably the best place to do it. But I think the challenge is we are treating this as if the development of AI is like the development of nuclear weapons. Only nation states can do it, etc., etc. Because it can be done by commercial companies who feel that they have to do it, the regulation would need, in my mind, to look a little bit more like banking, and it'd have to be very fleet on its foot. Because the most important thing about AI, because AI now teaches AI, it develops at an exponential rate, and it's just something we're not used to yet. It has massive positive benefits for the world going forward, medical breakthroughs, etc., etc. But it also can be very dangerous.
Now, Tim says here, I'm a huge Manchester City fan. I've had to take an extra day off work so I could avoid the railway chaos caused by train strikes by coming up a day early. I'm really starting to lose my patience. You were going to look at those strikes today, those railway strikes.
Look, what ASLEF are doing to the country is really affecting our economy. There's some estimations that says it's taken about $5 billion out of the economy. But what's really important is I think we now need to look at just how much they are paid. They're some of the best paid workers who work for us nationally. They get gold-plated pensions, and most of the people they're affecting don't earn anything like what they're earning. And I think we're getting to a point now where ordinary people are saying enough is enough. We cannot afford to pay you even better than you're being paid now, and your working conditions aren't that bad. They're beginning to lose support.
Aubrey, what do you think? I mean, I went to visit Northern Rail a couple of weeks ago to visit them, and there's a new train driver, newly started train driver in Northern Rail in West Yorkshire. The starting salary is £55,500. The starting salary for a train guard at Northern Rail is £32,500. I mean, lots of people will think, you know what, for starting salaries, they're actually pretty good, aren't they?
Yeah, there certainly will be some people in the rail industry that are paid fairly handsomely, and I think public sympathy hasn't laid with the striking rail workers as much as it has, say, with the nurses, which I think is why the government was so keen to strike a deal with the RCN, the Royal College of Nursing, as quickly as it did, whereas it's been quite happy to sort of let this issue of the rail strikes rumble on. I think what's concerning is the reports that ultimately this could last for at least another year. Yeah. And I think there is a degree to which ministers fear that unions are sort of trying to hold their feet to the fire, cause as much disruption as possible without the problem being solved in the run-up to the next election.
My concern is it could be the railway drivers, it could be the railway staff there who are going to suffer the consequences of an ongoing strike, because people say, do you know what, you don't need a driver, we can do it in complete automation, why should we put up with all this? And that's just my concern. One other thing, I didn't know whether to do my story on Dale Vince, because he's been making the headlines this week, hasn't he? This is the multi-millionaire who set up the company Ecotricity, but is also funding Just Stop Oil, and he's funding the Labour Party. And people are saying, is this right that the Labour Party should be funded by, you know, the same guy who's doing Just Stop Oil, particularly when Keir Starmer's come out with the same policy as Just Stop Oil, no more digging and drilling in the North Sea?
Yeah, there are lots of Conservatives trying to make great hay of this and sort of trying to link the donations to the policy that Keir Starmer announced earlier this week, which is about no more new sort of licences for oil and gas in the North Sea. Obviously, it creates some uncomfortable questions for him, but he's been sort of long supportive of green policies and energy, so
Don't you think
it's not a sort of great departure from pre-donation.
That doesn't stop the media normally, does it? When somebody expresses an opinion that they've held all their life and they get funding from somebody, it doesn't stop newspapers like The Guardian from stepping in and saying, well, hold on a minute, look at this.
But hang on, it's 1.4 million he's given to the Labour Party, and he's like the biggest supporter of Just Stop Oil. I mean, I would say that was undue influence on the Labour Party, pushing them into what are eco-zealots who are trying to bring the
way I
down.
look at this is, imagine this was the other way round and it was the Conservatives. The Labour Party, including The Guardian, would be absolutely apoplectic. And the point is this: when we talk about party finance, we always talk about big Tory donors and the influence they have, but actually it's a Labour Party who have few but huge donors, the unions, and now this individual, who have real influence over policy, and we're seeing it live today.
It'll come back and bite them, though, won't it? I mean, this sort of convergence here of Just Stop Oil and the Labour Party, naive of Keir Starmer. Don't you think?
Yeah, a lot of people have felt alienated by the tactics of protesters like Just Stop Oil, so Labour's probably not terribly comfortable being talked about in the same sentence as them. But the group seems to be fairly happy with the publicity. I think they were saying they were going to match, donations that were made to the group within a certain time frame, so they were enjoying the publicity of it. It was fundraising for them, essentially.
And just finally, page 17 in the Sun today, Jeremy Clarkson's column, talking about, and obviously it's come to greater prominence with the Phillip Schofield issue. It's about the banning of office affairs. He's saying that many companies have banned workplace relationships, and those that do allow a bit of water cooler love will often send in the HR department to throw water all over you if you try anything. And he points out that Barack and Michelle Obama met at work, so did Bill and Melinda Gates, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, Esther McVeigh and Philip Davis. I know, put that in his, put that in his list, but we did too. I mean,
surely people. I mean, that's where people meet. People. Have you ever met anybody, dated anybody that you've worked with?
I met my partner in the newsroom that we both worked in. So I think it should be allowed to bloom so long as you can behave professionally.
And the most important thing, most people meet their partner at work. So imagine this was wholesale; it'd have a significant effect on the makeup of British society.
Yeah. The only thing, all that I would say, and I don't know if you agree with me, look, nobody minds somebody asking you out for a date, whichever way. Nobody minds being asked for a date. You're flattered by asking for a date, and then if it works well, off you go. You've got a relationship you met at work. It's when you've said no and the request comes back again. That's the bit that it doesn't work, isn't it? Two people wanting to go out on a date is fine. It's repeated requests. Is that what happened, Phil?
To be fair, I said no repeatedly.
You were persistent.
I was persistent. Well, there you go. That's the opposite end. Persistency pays off.
As everybody always says, that she's a very lucky lady.
Oh,
everyone always says
I don't know, Aubrey, do you think that?
Yes, absolutely. I have to say that, I think.
Sean, do you think that?
I think Phil has done very, very, very well, and you should be aware of that.
Aubrey, that was the answer next time. Thank you both very much indeed for being with us this morning.
Coming up, loads still to come on Saturday morning with Esther and Phil. Are millennials secret capitalists, and what can Prime Minister Rishi Sunak do to win them over?
And is it true that William is not as popular as his dad, as the Prince of Wales? What does he need to do to win the public over? And Harry and Meghan might have promised to stay stum, but are they capable of doing that? You'll find out after this.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 11:25. Lots of views coming in, particularly about the debate we had earlier with Richard Tice and Gina Miller about civil servants implementing or not implementing government policy.
Yeah, Tom says quite plainly if they refuse to deliver government policies, then they should be warned, disciplined, and if they persist to refuse to undertake their job, dismissed.
John says if the civil servants PCS union can decide what policies they will implement and which they won't bother with, why bother having elections and parliament at all? Let's just let the PCS run the country.
And Kenneth says I'd sack them all and employ private administrators. They're employed to carry out the democratically elected minister's instructions with no political allegiances allowed. Well, that is really the thrust of all the views coming in on that debate.
With different opinions. I was struggling to find one, so that's why we haven't read one with a different opinion.
Now, a report released this week from the think tank Onward has found that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is more popular than his party with millennial voters.
It also found that while historically voters grew more likely to vote Tory as they aged, those between 25 and 40 were not making that shift.
But what can the Prime Minister do to win over younger voters? Well, James Cowling, the founder of Next Gen Tories group, joins us to discuss this. I want to talk about, so are they shy capitalists, these millennials? Is that a fair description?
I think so, and the reason I founded Next Gen Tories is to try and campaign for the Conservative Party to address some of these issues, because if you look at the attitudes of millennials, they aren't voting Conservative at the moment, and they're not getting more Conservative. But if you can deliver on some of the core issues that young people care about, housing, taxation, the cost of living in families, some of these core visions of becoming Conservative that people have, I think people will come round. They are shy capitalists.
Where would you start? Reducing the taxation, because I guess that's what you're talking about, reducing the taxation, or housing?
So I think you can do lots of these things at once. So housing is probably one of the big ones. Increasing housing supply, giving people the opportunity to get on the ladder. Supply is fundamental because simply we don't have enough housing and that has causes price prices to rocket.
But are they the people who'd be prepared to say we need less people coming into the country as well? Does that chime with their views? Because they might all be saying we want a house, but we've just done a debate, earlier today that we've got, immigrants now in 400 hotels. They're complaining that the rooms aren't big enough. So are they prepared to stand up and say, we've got to look after ourselves and no more people coming into the country?
Immigration comes lower down the ladder on millennials' priorities.
That's what I mean.
And you're right that it's a balance. So I think we need to do both of those things at once. So some people might say, let's lower immigration and not build more houses. I think you probably need to lower immigration and build more houses. And then you can get to a point where there is more supply for everybody. On the taxation point, it's about the balance of taxation. We tax income very, very heavily on working people. So the young average graduate in their late 20s, early 30s can be on a 50% rate of tax pretty easily. So when we're talking about future tax cuts, it's where should we prioritise? And income taxes on working people, those aspirational working people, is where we would look first when we do have the wiggle room.
On that, James, the Onward research suggested that millennials believe in equality very deeply, but they also favour tax cuts over redistribution. Does that make sense to you? Because to me, at first glance, that sounds contradictory to me.
I don't necessarily think it is. I think people want a fair capitalist system. It's balancing both a free market, but also a free market that works for everybody. I think at the moment, you get millennials not voting Conservative because they say, well, it's not working for me because we're not building the houses that I want to live in, and I'm more heavily taxed than my parents' generation, or money isn't being spent on that generation. So I think those people do want to see benefits, but we have to deliver for them.
I've always thought the big distorter was so many people going to university and so many people saddled with debt from going to university. And I actually think this is where the government now has got to focus its eye and get rid of that, or reduce the number of people going and reduce, these loans.
That's certainly an issue because, I see, for example, my student loan goes out every month, and it's essentially an additional income tax.
How much is it? Can I ask? How much do you pay a month?
Well, do you know what? I don't actually know exactly how much I pay a month, but I know that I don't even pay off the interest. So I now owe more than I did.
This needs to go.
Right?
This is the start. This is the start. Get rid of this, the size of this debt for young people.
Just finally, James, quickly, is this a feature, though, that the Conservatives have been in office for 13 years, and therefore this age group have known largely just a Conservative government, and they're fairly anti-establishment, and that if Labour had been in office for 13 years, then perhaps their voting intentions might be completely different, is it?
No, I don't think so. I think, really, the Conservative Party has got the big issues right, but in delivering that strategy, younger people have often fallen short. We know we haven't built enough homes. Taxation has fallen more heavily on working people. So what we need to do ahead of the next election is start to deliver on some of those things, and then those people will come back to us at the next election.
James Cowling, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Lots more still to come Saturday morning with Esther and Phil, including the latest on the FA Cup final and Epsom Derby. But first is the latest headlines with Ray.
31 minutes past 11. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom and our top story this hour. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has offered his condolences to the families of those killed in India following a train crash in which 261 people died and 850 were injured. The death toll makes it the country's deadliest rail incident in more than 2 decades. The army has been deployed to help evacuate the injured, with an extensive search and rescue operation ongoing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also set to visit the site in Odisha state. Well, 19 people have been arrested over plans to disrupt the Epsom Derby. Surrey Police has announced 11 were arrested in Mitcham and Byfleet in the early hours of the morning. Another 8 were arrested after a vehicle was stopped in Burgh Heath just over an hour ago. All were arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to commit public nuisance, and they remain in police custody. It comes after animal rising activists threatened to cancel or severely delay the horse racing event to protect the animals. Rail passengers are experiencing their 3rd day of major disruption this week as members of the ASLEF union go on strike. Workers across 15 train companies have walked out in their dispute over pay and conditions. The disruption is affecting people planning to attend the FA Cup final at Wembley and the Epsom Derby. Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to launch its counter-offensive against Russia. Speaking to the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Zelensky said he believes Ukraine will succeed in recapturing Russian-occupied territory, but he doesn't know how long that could take. Kyiv previously said it needed more Western armoured vehicles before the fight back could begin. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get straight back to Esther and Phil.
Now, as you heard there, what was going on at the Epsom Derby, there has been arrests, so we're going to bring you this news as it unfolds. We've got our reporter there, Paul Hawkins. So, Paul, tell us what's happening right now. OK, it looks like he's not ready just yet, but he is getting ready to speak to us. And as soon as he is ready, then we will bring you that story. But now we're just going to take a quick break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Saturday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 11:37. We were hearing in the news about the arrest made at the Epsom Derby. There's been threatened protests. Some arrests have been made. And so we're going to join Paul Hawkins, who's our reporter at Epsom Racecourse, and he can tell us the very latest. Paul,
yeah,
what's
the latest
happening?
from Surrey Police. 19 people have been arrested. 19 people arrested, Philip, in connection with planned criminal disruption at the festival. 11 people arrested at addresses in Mitcham and Byfleet in the early hours. A further 8 people arrested after a vehicle was stopped not far from here at around 10:20 this morning. We can speak to Louisa Hillwood, who is from the animal rights group Animal Rising. We're joined, by the way, at the protest area. This is in front of the racecourse, Louisa. Thanks for speaking to us. First of all, what's your reaction to these arrests this morning?
Thank you so much for having me. I mean, as long as we have a industry that causes harm to animals, you know, I love animals, I'm sure you do as well, there will be people who are willing to step in and stop that harm from happening. You know, I would break the window of a car to save a dog if they were in harm's way. It's no different here.
Yeah, one would assume police were using the legislation, the Public Order Act, to make these arrests. They can only do that if they found equipment on them that they believe was going to be used to try and attach themselves to something on the course. Were those people carrying that equipment? Can you confirm that?
Well, about the Public Order Bill, that's not true. The police can arrest people according to that bill with no evidence at all. All they have to say is that they have intelligence.
Yeah, and just tell us a little bit more about why you're here. I mean, you've spoken to the Jockey Club themselves, and they've allowed you to have this area outside. So there is some discourse between yourselves and the Jockey Club, and they do understand that you have a right to protest.
Of course, yeah. We actually approached the Jockey Club to start dialogue about what we wanted here today, because we want to protect the animals. We believe that the Jockey Club should be stepping in and making sure that happens. I mean, the Jockey Club, they actually own the Grand National race, where we saw 3 horses die this year. They also own and run Epsom Racecourse. They need to do better.
Yeah, well, they say that the fatality rate of horses is incredibly small, that they put millions of pounds in the industry into the holistic care of horses throughout their entire life, not just when they're racing, and that when it comes to the use of the whip, there's a restriction on the number of times the jockey can use it. If they exceed that number, then they end up being suspended. There is a huge amount of time and effort and care has gone into looking after horses, a lot more within the industry. That must be something you welcome.
Okay, what about these 3 horses who did die at the Grand National? What about Hill 16?
And they would say 1 is too many themselves.
Yeah, and
so they strive to get that down to 0. But you don't need to stop the whole industry, is what they're saying.
Well, the only way to get it to 0 is to stop the horse racing industry. I mean, horses die. A horse dies every other day in horse racing in the UK. In the month of May, 20 horses died, and it's flat racing season, which they say is the safest. I mean, horses dying is not the only problem. As you say, they are whipped up to 7 times in one race. They have to wear a bit in their mouth, a metal bit, which is used to control their whole body through their head. It's extremely painful for these horses. And for every horse that makes it to be a winner, there are thousands who didn't. And what happens to those horses?
Okay. And just very quickly, Louisa, you can answer this or not. Are you going to be disrupting the race this afternoon?
We'll have to wait and see.
Louisa, thank you for speaking to us. I really appreciate your time. I know you've got a speech to make, so I'll let you get back to it. Louisa Hillwood there from Animal Rising. So as you can see, look, this is the area out here where they're demonstrating while the race goes on. The Derby gets underway a little bit earlier at 1:30. They are anticipating disruption in there, but there are plans to prevent that disruption and also to deal with any disruption that happens, to clear it away quickly so the race can get underway.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that. The Derby's due off at 1:30, an earlier time this afternoon, so I'm sure you'll be bringing us the latest throughout the day on GB News. I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, horses are the best, racehorses are the best looked after animals in the world. There's absolutely no question about that. And I suspect if Animal Rising had their way, they're on about horses dying, what would happen to all the racehorses? I mean, if there's no horse racing, what's going to happen to them? I suspect they'd all be dying. So I'm not entirely sure what they're campaigning for. And interestingly enough, I mean, I'm not being funny, but I made a complaint to the RSPCA about the state of a horse at a gypsy encampment in my constituency a while ago. Didn't see Animal Rising there, to be perfectly honest. They're faffing about at the Epsom Derby with pampered racehorses that cost a fortune. But actual real abuse of animals and horses, nowhere to be seen, to be perfectly honest.
Well,
I'm very cynical about them.
That's when we put out our poll earlier on asking animal activists planning to disrupt today's events at Epsom Derby, do you think these protests really have the animals' interests in mind, or are they ignorant about horse racing and just attention seeking? And you know what? Of all of the people who voted, 86% said they're just attention-seeking. They don't know what goes on in the world of racing.
I think they don't know about horses either, because lots of horses die every week in this country just by running around a field, and they get themselves injured and caught in things and all the rest of it. So that happens.
But it's not on a racing track, that's just on a field as they run round.
Run round in a field. Lots of horses die every
and you need both sides of the argument there about what's going on. Now, we'll also, GB News will be bringing you the latest as that happens. Paul Hawkins is there, so if there's more arrest, if anything does happen, because the protester there wasn't actually going to say whether they were going to do anything at 1:30, but it sounds as if it was, and if it is, Paul Hawkins will be covering it. Now, this week, a royal biographer, Hugh Thomas, has suggested that Prince William has some catching up to do as Prince of Wales and could be about to launch a supercharge to woo the Welsh.
This comes as sources close to his brother and sister-in-law have claimed that they're now going to stop talking about the royal family because there is nothing left to say.
Well, we're joined now by royal commentator Judita da Silva. Now, tell us, has William got a lot to do? And if he is, what has he got to do to woo the Welsh?
I think it's kind of, it's a bit unfair to measure the start of the reign by the end of another. His father had over 60 years in the position, and he had an investiture ceremony in 1969. He spent his term at Aberystwyth University learning about Welsh culture and the language. So he was operating at more of an advantage, and the transition was one that had a lot of ceremony to it. William is kind of, since September, when Queen Elizabeth passed away and he first became the Prince of Wales, there's a lot that's been going on in Camp Royal. And so it's kind of a disadvantage he's had with taking on this new position, while the actual family itself was in so much conflict, and publicly so. And then there was the January of complete heartache, where Harry had the Netflix series and his biography. So there's been a lot to contend with. But what I say is that measuring William as the Prince of Wales is something that can only be done over time. And I do believe that when they talk about wooing the Welsh, spending time them, concerning yourself with their concerns and making provisions, using your platform of position and influence to give them the visibility and the support that they need, which is something that King Charles did very well over his 60-year-plus reign as Prince of Wales. And of course, being his son, he will do the same. So give him time.
Now, Charles is in Romania on a private trip at the moment, which means he will miss Harry when he comes back to the country. But I think he's pleasantly pleased that they're going to stay stum, Harry and Meghan. Do you think that's the case? And do you think Charles has been astute there, being out the country when Harry's coming in for his court case?
I think it is. I think it's very well timed, because it's only going to create more of a circus. And I do think that we talked about it before, that now that Harry and Meghan have more seasoned representation managing them behind the scenes, this is kind of in vein of what I expected would happen, where you've said all you had to say. You now have to move towards presenting yourselves as willing to reconcile and do right by bringing a family together, because that's the only way you will mend your public perception, particularly as a potentially UK brand. And I say bravo to that, because saying that at the end of the day, they could just stop talking. Why do you have to kind of put it out there publicly that you're going to stop talking? Is because you're announcing that there has been a shift in sentiment and you're moving towards reconciliation, which is a great thing, because as I always say, at the heart of this is a family and deep hurt. And to all of those who've watched William and Harry grow up, the most heartbreaking thing is to see these brothers fall apart. And if there is potential for reconciliation, we should all be supporting that and cheering that on.
Did they realise, Meghan's the astute one, did she realise she was losing the battle there?
I think it's, she's beginning, listen, if her management is as good as I know that they are, they've told her that it's pretty much a fait accompli when it comes to public opinion, the majority of public opinion in the UK. Don't push it any further. What you can do is fall behind the scenes and let Harry rehabilitate. And in time, they might come to just not warm to you necessarily, but accept you as something that comes with Harry. But Harry needs to do the mending on the UK side of the fence.
Thank you very much indeed, always keeping us informed there of what's going on in the royal circles.
I felt shortchanged there by Judita. Last time we spoke to her, I thought it was a budgie. You thought it was a
parakeet or something.
I feel.
I mean, he had to go double booked, so he said he had to stay in Cannes because Johnny Depp was having a party. He's a diva, basically, so that's why he wouldn't come.
Thanks, Judita. Thanks for that.
Next time, Hollywood, Cannes, wherever she's going to be next time, who knows? But look, to take a look at the latest news from the world of sports and showbiz, we'd like to say we're joined by Hayley Palmer and Aidan McGee. Thank you very much indeed. Should we start with showbiz? Because it's been a very showbiz week. We'll skip past sort of the Phillip Schofield stuff. We have had a lot of him, but he has lost one of his jobs to the lovely Jane McDonald.
This is the best news because, yes, she will be presenting the Soap Awards, which are on tonight. And I couldn't be more happier for her. She's the sort of person you just want to have a cup of tea and biscuit with, isn't she? She makes you feel really warm.
And this person, though, if you want a cup of tea and a biscuit.
She's best known for her travel shows, Cruising with Jane McDonald, Loose Woman. I love watching her on there. And she's actually had quite a sad time. She lost her fiancé to lung cancer in 2021, and they actually dated as teenagers, so it's quite a sad story. And she also lost her mum as well, so I feel like this is her time. She's making a comeback. She's in her 60s, and it's nice, isn't it, that someone can make a comeback, you know, because she was big in the 90s, and you think, well, will they ever kind of make it back again? So she does have a massive following. She does have a travel show out at the moment, but I am absolutely delighted.
And you know what, people who everybody lives in hope, don't they? The next big thing, will I come back? And this proves to everybody, keep following that dream, because you can come back. And as you said, a lady in the 60s, and she's now going to be doing prime time the Soap Awards.
Absolutely. I don't know who made that decision, but it's a great decision. And I think she loves her soaps as well. She can't wait for it tonight, and I'll definitely be tuning in.
Now, we're not allowed to speak to Phillip Schofield because Esther's put a ban on it, but we are allowed, therefore, to speak about Holly Willoughby. It says that she's going to be back on the sofa on this morning on Monday.
Yes, she is, with Jason Gibson.
Do we really think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I think it is going to happen.
Really?
Yes, it has been confirmed. I reported in the week that we weren't sure that was going to happen. Obviously, she's on holiday at the moment, as you can see in the papers. She is coming back. Is that the right decision? I don't know, but I guess they're just going to pretend that everything's OK, right? That's show business.
Yeah, well, you see, that could be the problem, pretending everything's OK. It'll be interesting to see it, because I think it could be a difficult, bumpy ride for Holly to be back so soon. But look, big day today. We've been covering, as well as Epsom Derby, the Manchester game, the FA Cup
Manchester
fight,
Derby.
both Manchester football teams, and the difficulty they've had getting there because of the train strike. But what's going to happen in the game?
In the game, look, Manchester City are odds-on favourites, although their last meeting was won by Manchester United at Old Trafford back in earlier in the season. Man United are protecting their legacy, they're protecting history today. They are the only club to have won the treble of Premier League, FA Cup and Champions League. That was back in 1999. Of course, they stopped Liverpool doing it, Man United, back in 1977 by winning the FA Cup at Wembley with that side containing Jimmy Greenoff, Steve Coppell, Alex Stepney, etc. So they did the business then. They've got a chance today to stop their great rivals, Manchester City, from doing the treble today. Of course, the treble can't be won today. They still have to win the Champions League on June the 10th. But what an incentive for United to go out and win that. And that's despite... That's the X factor today. That's what could tip it in United's favour. They're saving the history today, and that's your team talk done if you're Eric Ten Hag.
Does the FA Cup still have the same lustre it once did? I mean, are Manchester City going to play their...
Well, it does in a way.
Throughout the Cup, they seem to have played as sort of second team, most of the Cup.
But they've got the strongest squad in world football, so they can afford to play their second team. They're not even playing their first-choice goalkeepers today. They're playing Stefan Ortega instead of Ederson. But in terms of the prestige, the fact that you have to win the FA Cup as part of a treble, that immediately lends the FA Cup its prestige. Also, from a traditional point of view, it's 3 o'clock today for the first time in 12 years, which is important. They're bringing the Epsom Derby forward as well to 1:30. So that's nice to see it for the traditionalists who like to get a picnic out for the FA Cup.
It's not very good for the traditionalists in horse racing who like the Epsom Derby. It's been relegated.
It's not relegated. It's still a huge event. It's still a huge event.
Well, Animal Rising are certainly putting it at the front page of all the newspapers with the protesting that they're doing.
They are.
I know it's Anyway, less said about them.
But yeah, that's the point.
Have you got a tip for the Epsom Derby?
Yeah, I'm going to go for
tipster.
Aidan's rubbish at giving tips.
8-1.
Don't listen to him.
8-1. The Foxes, owned by the Leicester City owners, I think they're going to bounce back from relegation last week, and they're going to win the Derby.
Right, you get your ruler out and put a line through that one. That's narrowed the field down.
Well, I want to talk about Madeleine I think I say it's Dugan, who plays Lauren Branning. She used to play Lauren Branning in EastEnders. She is now not doing that role. Someone has taken over from that role. And she was saying that as an actress, when you're out of work, you need to get other jobs. So she's currently working in a doctor's surgery. And people are like, wow, I can't believe she's actually doing that. But I think it's a hard one, isn't it? Because when you are in the public eye, you feel like you can't do a normal job, but you have to. You have to pay the bills, right? I mean, I can actually remember when I didn't have any money at all and I worked in an office.
Last week, wasn't it?
It was like, yeah, nothing's changed. But for me, I always get sacked from jobs because I always talk too much and laugh too much.
I find that very hard to
I know.
You see, you found your right job.
It's the only thing I can do. They're like, Hayley, talk more. And I'm like, oh, go on then. Any other job, they're like, Hayley, enough.
Have you done any dodgy jobs?
Dodgy jobs?
The one you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I worked as a kitchen porter back in 2000.
Did you? Where was
that? Where? That was at the Brewers Fair in Sevenoaks. That's actually on the arterial road between Orpington and Sevenoaks, to be absolutely precise. But I got the manager's son into university through clearing, and so I got promoted to the front of the house. Anyway, this woman ordered a margarita in the afternoon, as in the cocktail. I thought she meant a pizza. I said, we don't serve food till 6.
Oh, my goodness.
Aidan McGee, thank you very much.
On that note,
indeed. Hayley Palmer, thank you very much indeed. Came to a crashing end.
It's true, that's true.
That's all we've got time for today. We'll be back at 10 a.m. next Friday. But up next is GB News Saturday with the wonderful Dawn Neeson.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Plenty of strong sunshine across the UK. Will be warm for many, but still chilly along some eastern and southeastern coasts. And the reason for this is this high pressure still hanging around, been around for a few weeks now, continues to keep it settled and dry for the vast majority of the UK. Notice, though, still breezy around some coasts, and it will be notably so through the next few days too. But for the afternoon, plenty of strong sunshine, high to very high UV levels. There'll be some cloud that comes and goes, the lowest and thickest cloud across northern parts of Scotland, and a little bit of low clouding down the east coast at times. With that northeasterly breeze, it will be chilly, temperatures 14 or 15 Celsius. But the further inland you come,